Hi, my name is Mark Zamueda, and welcome to this module, Types and Operators. We've learned all about variables, and each variable actually has a type. And we've seen a bit of this. We've seen number types and string types. In this module, we'll be looking at more of these types, and we'll also be looking at operators. Operators are symbols that add functionality. I'm sure you're familiar with the addition operator, where we can add numbers together, or the minus sign for subtraction. And we'll be looking at how to do all this kind of arithmetic with operators in JavaScript. Let's see what we'll be covering exactly. We'll start off by looking at numbers and all the operators associated with those. Next, we'll look at strings. There are several different ways to use strings. Strings are basically text, and they're created by using quotes, whether it's single quotes, double quotes, or backticks. We'll see how to work with these. And it's very common to have to convert between these types. Sometimes we'll have a number and we want to treat it as a string. Or sometimes we'll have a string, which could be something entered by a user or something downloaded off the internet. And we'll want to convert that into numbers. So we'll see how to do this. Next, we'll take a look at Booleans. A Boolean type has a value of true or false, and we'll see how to work with these. Next, there are two types that are very common in JavaScript. They're null and undefined. We'll see how to work with these values and what the main difference is. Finally, we'll wrap up this module by looking at objects and symbols. We have a whole module coming up that's all about objects, but an object is a valid data type in JavaScript, so we'll briefly have an introduction to objects. And symbols are more advanced, but we'll discuss those later in the course. So let's get started and look at how we can work with numbers and operators on numbers in JavaScript. One of the most common types of data you'll work with in JavaScript are numbers. Let's go straight to Visual Studio Code and start working with them. I'm in home.js, and let's create a simple number variable. And we've seen this before, and it's very simple. We simply enter the number. We don't need quotes. Let's just make it $20.99. And I'll show this price. I'll save it. And we see $20.99 showing up in the browser. There's a special operator called typeOf. An operator is a symbol that operates or changes some value. So when I say typeOf price, that's going to tell us the actual data type of price, which is a number. Let's save this and see what we get. We get the string number. So typeOf is a very valuable operator. If we put $20.99 in quotes, now price should be a string. I'll save it. And the word string shows up. So we'll be covering strings in a future clip, but for now let's just focus on numbers. So I'll get rid of the quotes. So once we have a number stored in a variable, we can perform normal mathematic operations on it. One way we can do this, I'll set price equal to price plus 1. And what this line of code does is it looks up price and it adds 1 to it. And it stores the result back into the price variable. And we don't want to show the message type of price, we just want to show the message price now. I'll save this. And you can see that we get $21.99. So the plus symbol does simple addition. Likewise, we could do subtraction. I'll enter the minus symbol and save it. We get $19.99. Again, we take price, which is $20.99, and subtract 1 from it, and store that result back in price. Let's set the price to 12. And another operator is the star operator, which is for multiplication. So if we say price equals price star or times 3, I'll save it, and we get 36. 12 times 3 is 36. There's also a division operator, which is a /. The normal division sign doesn't show up on most keyboards, so that's why we use the / for division. I'll save this, and we get 4. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And there's also a special operator to get the remainder. It's the % symbol. This is sometimes called the Modulus Operator, but mainly what it does is get a remainder. So price modulus 5, I'll save it, we get 2. And that's just the remainder of 12 divided by 5. Now these operators all have shortcuts. It's very common to have lines like this. Price equals price, operator, and a value. So let's go back to addition again. And we can say price plus equals 5. And that'll give us the same result as saying price equals price plus 5. It takes price, adds 5 to it, and stores it back in the price variable. I'll save this. And you can see we get 17. Likewise, we have a minus equals symbol. That'll subtract 5 from price and store it back in price. We get 7. And multiplication, price star equals 5. That'll multiply price by 5. We get 60. And likewise, you can do divide equals and modulus equals. I'll do price divide equals 5. We get 2.4. So that's 12 divided by 5 is 2.4. And modulus equals, I'll save it. And we get 2 as the remainder of price divided by 5. So you have to remember that the equal sign is more of an assignment operator. It assigns a new value to whatever's on the left side of it. In this case, it's the variable price. And of course, we can work with multiple variables. Let's add another one. We'll call it tax rate. And we'll set that to 0.07. And we don't need to store that in a variable. We can just go ahead and show that directly. Let's show message price times tax rate. I'll save it. And you can see that we get a very long decimal number, but mainly we're interested in the 0.84. So that would be the amount of tax to pay. Let's go back to working just with price again. And there's another special operator, which is the increment operator. The symbol is plus plus, 2 addition signs. And what this does is it adds 1 to the number. So I'll save this, and you can see it shows the number 13. One of the tricky things about this, though, is that the operator can go after the variable. And this is a common bug in JavaScript. Let me just save this and let's see what we get. Price is still set to 12 when we call show message. When we put the increment operator after the variable, it waits until that line of code is executed, and then it increments the variable. So if we do a console.log price, let's take a look at what price really is by the time this code finishes executing. I'll go to the console and I'll save the code. And we can see that show message price is 12, but it logs out 13. So it's very important to keep track of where you put your increment operator, whether it's before the variable name or after it. This is the source of many bugs. Likewise, there's a decrement operator, minus minus, which subtracts 1 from a variable. I'll save it. So we still get 12 in the website, but our console now logs out 11. So price is decremented by 1. If we wanted to decrement price first, we would just put the minus minus symbol in front of price. I'll save it. And now we get 11, both in the website and the console. So those are simple examples of mathematical operations using numbers. However, there are some things that can go wrong. And we'll take a look at those in the next clip. There are certain things you need to be very careful of when working with numbers. If you're not aware of these, bugs can creep into your code. One important feature to know about is operator precedence. Let's see what this is about. So I'll clean up this code a bit from the last clip, and we're simply showing a price of 12. I'll save it, and that's what we get. Let's set price to something different. Let's set it to 3 plus 2 times 2. What do you think is going to show? Well, 3 plus 2 is 5 times 2 is 10. I'll save it. But we don't get 10, we get 7. And the reason why has to do with the precedence of operators. If you remember from math class, multiplication and division always come before addition and subtraction. So this multiplication right here will come first. 2 times 2 is 4, and then the addition will occur. 3 plus 4 is 7, and that's our result. So always be careful when looking at code or writing your code to know which operations take place first. I'm at Google and I searched for Mdn Operator Precedence. Mdn is the Mozilla Developer Network, and that's a great source of information on anything related to JavaScript. We'll be using it a lot in this course. And one of the key charts at the site is the operator precedence chart. That's what tells us that multiplication and division come before addition and subtraction. And there are a lot of other operators we'll be working with in this course, so let's take a look at this chart. Here's the web page, and I'll scroll down a bit. And here's the table. I'll scroll down until we find something that we're familiar with. So here we have multiplication, division, and remainder. That's the percent symbol we looked at. Sometimes it's referred to as a modulus operator. And that's at level 15. And we see addition and subtraction right here at level 14. So the higher an operation is on this chart, the higher the precedence. So this shows you that multiplication, division, and the remainder operation all take place before addition and subtraction. Not only that, but these are evaluated from left to right. Going back to the code, the way we can get around this is by using parentheses. If we want to bypass those rules, we use parentheses, and anything in parentheses will execute first. I'll save this. And now we have 3 plus 2 is 5 times 2 is 10, and that's our result. And we can even see these parentheses in the table we just looked at. I'll scroll up, and precedence 21 is grouping, and it shows the parentheses right here. So grouping with parentheses takes precedence over everything else in JavaScript. In the next clip, we'll take a look at another common source of bugs concerning numbers in JavaScript. JavaScript works with floating point numbers. So we can have large numbers with many decimal places, but they're not always precise. This could lead to some problems in JavaScript. Let's look. So what I'll do is I'll set price to 1.1 plus 1.3. I'll save it. And we can see the number here, 2.4, with lots of zeros. But let's shrink this down so that we can see the whole thing. I'll pull up index.html, and I'll search for get a grip. And instead of an H1 tag, let's change it to an H3 tag so that it's a little bit smaller and we can see the whole thing. I'll save it. And we can see the number here. It's 2.4, a bunch of zeros, with a 4 on the very end. So this is a little bit inaccurate. We know that 1.1 plus 1.3 should be exactly 2.4. And it's always important to keep this in mind, because later on in the course, we're going to be comparing numbers. And this number that we see here is not equal to 2.4. It's a tiny bit more. So I'm mentioning it here now, but we'll see this later in the course when we start comparing numbers and variables. In the next clip, we'll take a look at negative numbers. Of course, we can work with negative numbers in JavaScript as well. Let's take a look at how we do this. So we're setting a variable amount to 20 and showing it. And to make a negative number, we simply add a minus sign in front of the number. I'll save this. And we get minus 20. But it gets a little tricky when we subtract negative numbers. What if we wanted to say 20 minus negative 2? Well, we get the red squiggly line under the 2 because we're actually using the decrement operator, minus minus. You need to have a space in there. So I'll save this. And we get the correct answer. It's 22. However, this code looks very confusing. It's not really clear that we're working with the number negative 2. The expression looks more like a typo. So to be very clear that we're working with a negative number in the middle of an expression like this, we usually put it in parentheses. And that just makes the intention of the coder very clear, that we're working with the number 20 minus negative 2. And by saving it, of course, we'll get the same answer, 22. And the decrement operator will also give us negative numbers. Let's say we set the amount to 0, and we want to show message minus minus amount. I'll save it. And we get negative 1. So negative values work much like they do in math class. You just want to make sure to use parentheses to make your intention clear when working with negative numbers. So that's all we're going to do with numbers for now. In the next clip, we'll take a look at strings. Strings are made up of text. We've already worked with strings a bit in this course. Strings are text, such as hello world, or any kind of name or title, or something that a user might type in to a field. Let's work with these in JavaScript. So we have a variable message, and let's set it to a string value. I'll use single quotes, and we'll see shortly how we can use different types of quotes. But let's just say hello world. I'll save this. And we get hello world in the browser. We could also use double quotes, and that'll work as well. I'll save it, and we get the same result. And you'll notice that the quotes don't show up when we print it on the web page. But what if we wanted the quotes to show up? We use a special character called an escape character. It's the backslash. So I'll specify backslash double quote, and that'll put a literal double quote in the string. And I'll put one at the end as well. I'll go backslash double quote, and I'll hit Control S to save it. And we get hello world with world in quotes now. And of course you could do this the same with single quotes if you're working with single quotes. And there are actually a lot of different characters that we can escape using this backslash. Let's go to the Mozilla Developer Network and see how we can work with this. This is the page we were at earlier, Operator Precedence. We'll search for uppercase string. And I'll click this one right here. And I'll just search for the word escape. And we're looking at this section, escape notation. And here we have all the different characters that we can create by using this escape sequence. We saw this one, the backslash double quote, that puts the literal double quote in the string. We can also do it with a single quote. Another common one you see is backslash n for a new line character. And you can also do a /t for a tab. But feel free to look at this table in case there's some special kind of code you need to enter into a string. And remember, it's listed under the string object at Mdn. And there's one other special way to create strings. We make more room here, and we can create a string with the backtick character. It's not an apostrophe, it's the opposite, and it's usually located to the left of the 1 on the keyboard. But here I have 2 backticks, and I can put a normal string in here. I'll just say hello, and that shows up fine. But the special thing about the backticks is that we can do something called interpolation. We can print out a variable within the string. So let's create a new variable. Let name equal Andrea. And now that we have this variable name, we can embed it within message. The way we do that is we specify $, and then opening and closing curly braces. And we put the variable name inside. The variable name is name. So that looks like strange syntax, but it works great. I'll save this. And we get hello Andrea. Another benefit of using the backtick characters for strings is that we can add new lines within the string. I'll hit enter a few times. And there might be occasions where you need these new line characters in a string. I'll save this. And it shows fine with no errors. The thing to remember though is that in a web page, when we're working with text, it removes all the white space, such as new line characters, tabs, and spaces, and replaces all of it with a single space. So instead of showing message, let's also console log it. Console.log message. And I'll open up the console, I'll right-click and inspect. Click on console, and I'll save this to execute it. And here you can see that in fact, our message variable does have new line characters in it. And again, all this white space gets converted into a single space when you're working with things such as header tags or paragraph tags in HTML. It's very common in JavaScript to manipulate and work with strings, so we'll go into the details of that in the next clip. We saw how we could use operators to manipulate numbers. The operators were symbols such as plus, minus, the multiplication symbol, which is a star, or the division symbol, and others. And we can do some of the same things with strings. Mainly we use the plus operator to add strings together. That's called concatenation. So here we have a variable message, and it's being set to hello. Let's modify this. So we'll set message equal to message plus space world. I'll save it. And you can see now that the browser shows hello world. So the plus symbol simply takes one string, in this case hello, and adds space world to it, another string. And we don't have the other mathematical operators here, but we do have a very rich set of methods that we can use. We'll be covering methods later in the course, but you can think of a method as an action we can take on a string. So I'll modify this, and I'll say message equals message dot. And you'll notice that when I type the dot, all these items show up. And I'm going to pick the item to lowercase. And this will convert the string to lowercase, as the name says. But we have to enter parentheses, and we'll cover that later too in the course as well. So what this is going to do is it's going to take message, and convert it to lowercase and save it back in message, the variable. I'll save this, and it prints out hello lowercase. Likewise, there's a toUppercase method that we can call. I'll save it. And again, this is taking message, hello, and converting it all to uppercase and storing it back in the variable message. And the result is an all uppercase hello. And there really are a lot of ways we can manipulate strings. Looking at this list of methods again, a very common thing to do is to create a substring, which is a smaller slice of the string. So I'll click on substring right here. And notice that when I enter the opening parentheses, it tells me a little bit of detail about how to work with substrings. But for now, just know that the first number we type is the location where we want to start to grab a substring. So I'll enter 1, and I'll save it. And you can see that it shows ELLO. It dropped off the H. Now, to understand this better, one place we can go is to Mdn, as we've seen earlier. I'm at the string reference, and we've seen a few things on this page already. But if we scroll down on the left side, you can see a section called methods. And these are all the different methods or actions that we can perform on a string. And we'll take a look at this more when we're working with objects later in the course. But if you wanted to look around now, that's fine. You can find out what all these methods do. And in addition to methods, we also have properties. And a property is sort of like a variable. It holds a single value on an object. And an extremely popular property to use on a string is the length. So I'm setting message equal to message.length, which is the length, the number of characters in the string. I'll save it. And you can see that we get 5. It's important to also know that 5 is a number. Let's just show this by showing type of message, and we get number. But if we don't do any kind of assignment here, I'll just comment this out with the // and save it. You can see type of message is string. So what if we had message is equal to the string 123? Now 123 is a number. I'll clear out this line just to make it more clear. What do you think is going to show now? We're showing type of message, but message is a string with a number inside it. I'll save it. And it's still a string. If we left the quotes out, it would be a number. And this is very important to know. Like what if we tried to show the message plus 2? Well, if message were a number, the answer would obviously be 125. But I'll save this and let's see what we get. We get 1, 2, 3, 2. So whenever we have a string, such as the message variable, and we use the plus operator, it works on strings. That means that the 2 will also be converted into a string. So when we add a 2, we're essentially adding a string 2 to the end of 1, 2, 3. And that's why we get this value here. Obviously, if we took off the quotes, so that message is a literal number, 1, 2, 3, I'll save it. And then we get 125. So it's very important to know that when we are working with strings, it doesn't do any kind of automatic number conversion. And if we use the plus symbol, it converts everything to a string. I'll save this, and again we get 1, 2, 3, 2. So we'll be looking at strings in more detail in the module on objects, because strings are one of the most common objects that you'll use. There are times when we have a string in JavaScript and we want to convert that string into a number. Likewise, sometimes we have a number and we want to convert that into a string. Let's see how we do this in JavaScript. So we have a variable amount set to the number 123. But what if we wanted to use amount as a string rather than a number? I'll say amount equals amount dot toString, and opening and closing parentheses. We'll learn more about this dot operator when we learn about objects. But for now, just know that you can take a variable that's a number, such as amount, and call dot toString on it. And that'll convert it into a string. To show that, I'll show the message type of amount. I'll save it. And we get string. Usually JavaScript will take a number and automatically convert it into a string when needed. But it's a little bit trickier when we have a string and we want to convert that into a number. Let's see how we do that. Let's say we have the string with the value 123.12. We can convert this to a number by specifying number, which is an object. We'll learn about that later in the course. But we can say number dot parse float, and the string goes in parentheses. So whatever string we put here will be parsed, and JavaScript will be looking for a number out of this string, and it'll store that number in a mount. I'll save this, and you can see we get 123.12. But more importantly, if we do type of amount, I'll save it and we get number. So the conversion did happen. You just want to make sure that we don't have any non-numerical values before the number. I'll just put the letter A here and we'll see what happens. I'll remove the type of, and I'll save it. And we get a strange symbol called NaN. This stands for not a number. And that just means that we weren't able to parse a number out of this because of the character A. Now if we move the character A and put it on the end, I'll save it, and it prints 123.12. So when we're parsing a string, you just need to make sure that the beginning of the string is a number. As soon as it runs into a character that isn't part of a number, it stops parsing and does not throw an error. So this could be useful. So to convert a string to a number, we usually call number.parseFloat, passing it the string. To convert a number to a string, a lot of times that happens automatically, but if you need to do it yourself, you specify the variable name .toString with the opening and closing parentheses. So that covers strings and numbers. We'll take a look at Boolean values in the next clip. Variables that are a Boolean type have either the value true or false. Those are the only two values. Sometimes you think of true as yes or some number, and you think of false as no or 0 as a number. Let's take a look at these in Visual Studio Code. So I'll create a new Boolean variable. We'll call it saved, and we'll set it to false. Maybe this variable keeps track of whether or not the user saved their information or not. But any kind of true, false, yes, no value is Boolean. So I'll show message type of saved. I'll save it and we get Boolean. And the other value is true. I'll save this. And we also see that it's a Boolean value. If we look at the actual value of it, I'll remove the type of operator. I'll save it and we get true. One common operation that we perform on Boolean variables is to flip it. If it's true, we want it to be false, or if it's false, we want it to be true. The way we do this is we can say saved equals not saved. So the exclamation point we see here means not. So if saved is true, it'll become not true, but false. Likewise, if it's false, it'll become not false, but true. So I'll save this, and you can see we get the value false. Saved starts off as true, but then we set saved equal to not saved, and that's how we get the false value. And this is a very simple type, but it's used in many places. We'll see it later in the course when we do more programming. The next types we'll take a look at are the null and undefined types. Null and undefined are two more types in JavaScript. These are also very simple. Null has one value, null, and undefined has one value, undefined. Let's see how we work with these in JavaScript. Here we're declaring the variable saved, but we're not initializing it. It has no value. And we saw earlier in the course that it will have a value of undefined. When we call showMessage, nothing shows up in the website, but let's console.log this value out. I'll save it and I'll open up the console. And you can see that we do get undefined, even though nothing's showing in the browser. And that's the definition of undefined. It means that we have not initialized a variable or some other value. Now it may be that save does get initialized, say to something like the value 10, but then later in our code, after we run some processing or some algorithm, we might want to wipe out the value that's stored in saved. We can say saved equals null. So I'll save this and we'll see what we get. So when we set a value to null, still nothing shows in the browser. And in the console, we get the value null rather than undefined. So the difference is that JavaScript will set values to undefined when they're not initialized. but a programmer will set a variable to null when they want to wipe out that value. But that isn't enforced by JavaScript. That's just a best practice. We could very easily say here that saved is equal to undefined. I'll save this, and we're back to getting undefined in the console. But it's agreed among many developers that when we want to wipe out the value of a variable, we use null instead of undefined. That way we can always differentiate between what JavaScript is doing with undefined and what developers are doing with null. In the next clip, we'll take a look at the last two types, which are objects and symbols. The last two types we'll look at are objects and symbols. Objects are a very important part of JavaScript, and we'll be covering them in detail later in the course. But we'll just take a quick look now just to find out what they are. And symbols is a very advanced type. We won't take a look at that until later in the course when we're discussing objects. So for now, let's just take a look at what an object is. Let's say we have a variable called person, and that person has a first name and a last name. Normally you would use two variables, one for first name and one for last name. But with an object, you can store all that information together. And you store it together within curly braces. So here I have open curly braces and closing curly braces. And inside of this, we can specify what are called properties, which are similar to variables. Let's say first name, and I'll just say John for the value, and last name, Adams. So person is now an object. And to prove that, let's enter type of person. And we'll see what we get when I save it. We get object. We can call show message like we were before. So now it'll show in the website. We have object. If we wanted to see what the first name is of this person, we can say person dot first name. So the dot operator takes an object and pulls up one of the properties off the name. In this case, we're looking at the first name. I'll save it. And we get John. Another very useful feature of objects is that we can have something called methods, where a property like first name holds a single value. A method can actually run its own block of code. And we'll get to that in time. But for now, just know that an object is another valid data type in JavaScript. And the final data type is symbols. And a symbol can be used as a property in an object, such as first name, but it's hidden. There are times where you might want to hide information about an object, and you use symbols for that. But we'll take a look at that later in the course when we cover objects. Let's wrap up this module with the summary. We started off this module by looking at numbers. Numbers are declared easily with no quotes and nothing special. And we can use the main mathematical operators with numbers. Plus, minus, the star for multiplication, and the / for division. We also saw how the % symbol can be used as a remainder operator. Next, we looked at strings. Strings are text, and we define those with three different styles of quotes: the double quotes, single quotes, or backticks. And we have our choice, but the backticks allow us to enter white space and new line characters, while also letting us do interpolation. We saw how to put variable values directly within a string. Next, we saw how to convert between data types, specifically numbers and strings. If we had a numeric variable, we can specify .toString with parentheses in order to convert it into a string. Likewise, if we had a string such as 123 here, we can call number with a capital N .parseFloat, passing it whatever string we'd like to parse. This will result in a number 123. You just need to be careful that if the string doesn't have valid number characters in it, you might get the result NaN, which stands for not a number. And we'll see later in the course how we can check for this. Next, we looked at Boolean values with the Boolean type, and these are either true or false. And there's one operator that we use with Booleans. It's the not operator, the exclamation point. And this just flips the Boolean. If the Boolean's true, then the not symbol turns it false, and vice versa. Next, we looked at null and undefined. We saw how undefined is assigned by JavaScript when we don't initialize a value. So if as a programmer we ever wanted to wipe out the value of a variable, we would use null instead. So developers use null to show that a value has been wiped out, And JavaScript uses undefined to show that a value was never assigned in the first place. And that's the best practice. Always use null and never use undefined. Finally, we looked at objects and symbols. We saw how objects are created by curly braces, and we're going to be covering these in detail along with symbols later in the course. So now you know all about variables and the type of variables that we work with in JavaScript. In the next course module, we'll take a look at program flow. Normally, our programs have been flowing top to bottom. Like as we write code, the code was executed sequentially from top to bottom. But sometimes you want to jump around and loop, and things don't always happen sequentially. We'll find out more about that in the next module.